That is the unmistakable voice of Maria Callas, probably the most instantly recognizable soprano the world has ever known. And this is my personal tribute, not just to a legend, but to an artist whose voice and artistry have shaped my life, inspired my singing, and moved me in ways that are impossible to put into words. When I was 10, I begged my parents for singing lessons. All I wanted was to belt like Ronnie James Dio or croon like Neil Diamond. Instead, fate delivered me to Molly Lane, a retired opera singer and teacher who, as it turned out, had a front row seat to history. Molly was more than a teacher. She became like a second mother to me. During weekly lessons, she often spoke of the night she sat in the Royal Opera House, November the 8th, 1952, witnessing the Covent Garden debut of a largely unknown Greek-American soprano, Maria Callas. You're listening to it right now, that night. Molly always said, that was the night the opera world in the UK changed forever. For her, it wasn't Joan Sutherland or anyone else. Joan Sutherland was in the cast that night. Only La Divina mattered. I grew up surrounded by Callas's voice, her photos, her legend. In my teens, I borrowed a book from the library for years which just contained photographs of her. But it wasn't just stories. Years later, when Molly was downsizing, she gave me her almost complete collection of opera magazines, a treasure trove spanning decades. In the November 1952 issue, tucked inside, I found cuttings from all the British newspapers' reviews of Callas's debut and Molly's handwritten notes in the margins. The yellowed paper still smelled faintly of her home. It was real. Molly truly had been there that night. Through these magazines, I had a thread leading back to the moment Maria Callas changed the world. At the Guildhall, my teacher, Rudolf Pianai, echoed that refrain. The greatest singer of all time was Maria Callas. You must study her. And so I did. Again, I listened, I learned, and tried to understand what made her different. That eternal question. Maria Callas isn't just a legend to me. She's a living link, a voice that shaped my teachers, my own singing, and the way I hear and think about music. That is why I want to tell you her story. She was called La Divina, the Divine One. For some, opera incarnate. For others, a myth, a scandal, a sensation. But to me, she's part of my story. As I listened to the recording from that night, November the 8th, 1952, I still find it hard to believe that Molly, the woman who would become like a second mother to me, was actually in the house. She was there hearing this exact performance as a young student. As it unfolded, she would go on to shape my life, my singing, become part of my family. My second daughter bears her name as her middle name, and she was there listening to Maria Callas sing this. What strikes me every time is the utter perfection of this singing. Every attack is clean, every grace note technically flawless and charged with meaning, every run perfect, laden with emotion, landing in exactly the right place, always emotional and musical, the diction, the phrasing, the power. This is Callas at her absolute best. If there is a sadness to this, it's because such white-hot brilliance could not last, perhaps last forever. But in this moment, she is incandescent. To understand how Maria Callas arrived at this moment, how a young woman from New York, daughter of Greek immigrants, with a domineering mother and a childhood split by war and ambition, came to stand at the center of the operatic universe, we have to go right back to the beginning. Maria Callas, Maria Kalageropoulos, the daughter of Greek immigrants, was born in New York City in 1923. Her family's story was one of hope and hardship, like so many who arrived in America chasing her dream. Her mother, Evangelina, was the driving force, ambitious, restless, always longing for a life more glamorous than the one she had left behind. Evangelina would later say she was unhappy as a wife and a mother, but she saw in Maria a chance to remake her own destiny. From the very beginning, Maria was not just a child to her, she was a project. Her father, George, was quieter, gentler, but less present, a pharmacist with dreams of his own. The marriage was strained. The shadow of a lost son, Vasilis, who died of typhoid at a young age, hung heavily over the household. Evangelina's grief and ambition both found their outlet in Maria. Maria's earliest memories were not of applause or admiration, but of lessons, discipline, and sacrifice. Evangelina would march her daughters, Jackie and Maria, across New York, seeking out talent shows and music teachers. Maria was shy, clumsy, and overweight, often compared unfavorably to her prettier older sister. Evangelina pushed Maria relentlessly. The little girl who would one day silence La Scala with a single note spent her childhood fighting for her mother's approval, for scraps of affection. She learnt early that love and achievement were tangled together. As the family's fortunes worsened, in 1937, Evangelina left George, taking Maria and Jackie back to Athens. There, in a city soon to be gripped by war, Maria's real education began. In Greece, everything was survival. Maria's schooling was erratic, but her musical talent was undeniable. She began studying at the Athens Conservatoire under the formidable Elvira de Hidalgo, a former star of the great European stages and a teacher who saw in Maria not just promise but the potential for greatness. Elvira became a true mentor, perhaps the first to show Maria real unqualified belief in her. She taught her not just how to sing, but how to be a singer. In the chaos and deprivation of wartime Athens, Maria's discipline and artistry were forged in fire. From childhood's loneliness and pressure through poverty and war, Maria Callas was becoming more than a singer. She was becoming a force, a woman for whom singing was both a refuge and a rebellion. Callas would later say, "My mother used to say, 'You will be famous one day. You must work, work, work.' I worked and I waited." Elvira de Hidalgo said, "She had something inside her that could not be taught, an instinct for drama, a burning will." If Maria Callas was forged in adversity, she was shaped artistically and emotionally by her teacher, Elvira. Elvira was a legend in her own right, a Spanish coloratura soprano whose career had taken her to the stages of La Scala and the Metropolitan, who had sung with Caruso and had been acclaimed as one of the most dazzling technicians of her era. By the time Maria met her, Elvira had become a revered teacher at the Athens Conservatoire. She was everything Maria's mother was not, encouraging, exacting, and above all, truly musical. Elvira didn't just teach technique, she demanded discipline, the kind that separates the merely talented from the truly great. Every lesson was a masterclass in bel canto, the art of spinning long, seamless phrases, the necessity of breath control so deep it became invisible, the articulation of every note, every consonant, as if it were a jewel. She drilled Maria in trills, runs, turns, and condensers until her voice moved like quicksilver. But even more important, Elvira taught her the power of interpretation. She would say, "The audience must feel what you feel. Don't just sing, live the character. Give them your heart." Maria absorbed it all with an intensity that astonished her teacher. She would practice for hours, often until her voice was hoarse, her eyes burning. She was competitive, driven, and almost painfully eager to please. Qualities Elvira both respected and tried to soften. Under Elvira's guidance, Maria learned that technique was not an end in itself, but the means to express emotion, to tell a story, to hold an audience breathless. This was the soil in which La Divina was planted. Years later, Callas would say, "I owe everything to Madame de Hidalgo. She taught me the discipline of the theatre and the beauty of the voice." In a battered city of Athens, as war raged and poverty loomed, a partnership was forming, a bond of artist and mentor. It was there, under the stern but loving eye of Elvira de Hidalgo, that Maria Callas first glimpsed what she would become, not just a singer, but an artist. She became, in Elvira's words, a tigress, an actress, a voice of destiny. Elvira de Hidalgo. From the beginning, she was not just a student, she was a phenomenon. I only helped her and find herself. Callas. Maria de Hidalgo taught me to make the voice serve the music and the character. That is everything. Armed with the technical firepower and artistic imagination Elvira helped unlock, Maria Callas stepped onto the stages of war-torn Athens. The world outside was grim, but inside those small, smoke-filled theatres, something extraordinary was taking root. Her debut came at just 16 in a student production of Cavalleria Rusticana. Already displaying the force of a mature dramatic soprano, critics noted the richness, the surprising volume, and, most remarkably, the sense that this was more than a voice, it was a personality. She didn't just sing, she inhabited her roles. Whether as Santuzza, Tosca, or later Leonora in Fidelio, the audience felt every flicker of rage, love, or heartbreak. Her command was so total that even in the chaos of German occupation, when blackout curtains hung over the city, the theatres were packed. People risked curfews and danger to hear her. Reviews of the time reported on a voice of volcanic power. Not just a singer, but a phenomenon. To hear her is to forget the world outside, contemporary reports. Maria's reputation soared. Each performance wasn't just a display of technique, but a lesson in what opera could be. Urgent, raw, human. She worked constantly, sometimes taking on 3 different roles a week, learning scores in days, never missing a rehearsal. And through all of it, Elvira de Hidalgo was at her side, sometimes a gentle guide, sometimes a relentless taskmaster. Their relationship was more than a teacher and a student. In a city battered by war and scarcity, they became each other's family. Elvira saw in Maria a vessel for her own lost dreams and a torchbearer for the old art of bel canto, already slipping away from the operatic world. Maria, for her part, poured all her ambition, loneliness, and longing for approval into her singing and into her teacher's trust. Elvira. She was born for tragedy and greatness. When she sang, you could hear her life in every note. For Callas, that period in Athens, though filled with struggle, was a kind of crucible. By the end of the war, she was no longer just a promising student. She was the undisputed prima donna of the Greek stage, ready for a larger world. But Athens, for all its hardship and glory, was never going to be enough for Maria Callas. By 1947, with war behind her and her name already whispered beyond Greek borders, Maria set her sights on Italy, the land of her idols, the birthplace of opera itself. She packed up her hope, her scars, and her unstoppable will, and set out on the journey that would change not only her life, but the very course of opera itself. In Italy, Maria began singing whatever work she could find. Turandot in Verona, Gioconda in Venice, roles demanding power and stamina, but not yet the subtlety that would later define her artistry. Most astonishingly, she even took on Isolde in Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, in Italian translation, a role learned very short notice and sung at the audition, a role few Italian opera houses had ever staged, and even fewer sopranos dared tackle. Listening now, it's a different Callas that sings the Liebestod, a voice with enormous weight and darkness, capable of cutting through Wagner's dense orchestration, but still searching for its true identity. There's force, drama, promise, but the refinements, the colours that would later make her immortal, are still to come. It is impressive, though, and one wonders where she could have developed had she stayed in this repertoire. It was in this atmosphere, restless, uncertain, on the edge of obscurity or breakthrough, that Maria's destiny shifted. In Venice, she was heard by the great conductor Tullio Serafin, a giant of the Italian stage. Serafin was legendary for his ability to spot and nurture talent. He'd worked with Caruso, Poncel, and countless others. Serafin saw in Maria something others had missed, not just a big dramatic voice, but a rare intelligence, a volcanic emotional truth. He became her mentor, advocate, and in many ways her second father. Serafin began to guide her toward the bel canto repertoire, the music of Bellini, Donizetti, and Rossini, roles that demanded not just volume and force, but agility, nuance, and emotional complexity. He told her, with your gifts you can do anything, but with bel canto you will be unique. This advice changed everything, for Maria began to transform. The voice, still huge, began to dance, finding new colors, new expressivity, a new sense of line. Under Serafin's direction, she debuted as Elvira in I Puritani, a role once considered unsingable for a dramatic soprano. It was the beginning of the Callas the world would come to know, not just a singer of power, but of poetry, tragedy, and infinite subtlety. Italy did not welcome Maria with open arms, but it gave her the stage, the repertoire, and the mentor she needed to become herself. Here, Maria Callas began the transformation from gifted outsider to the voice that would define an era. Venice, 1949. The opera house La Fenice, the Phoenix, was a fitting place for a young singer to be reborn. Maria, still an outsider, was offered the lead role in Bellini's I Puritani, a role notorious for its impossible coloratura and stratospheric high notes, usually the domain of much lighter voices. She had only a few days to prepare. Her contract was for Brunhilde, amazingly, in Wagner's Walküre. But when another soprano fell ill, Seraphine asked Maria to learn I Puritani on almost no notice. Where others would have refused, Maria only saw a challenge. Against all odds, Maria delivered a performance that stunned Venice. Her voice, still large and dramatic, suddenly revealed an agility and a tenderness, a fire in the coloratura passages that nobody had expected. This was also the moment the world began to hear her, not just in the theatre but on record. Her very first studio recordings date from this period, glimpses of a voice in transition. There's the Liebestod from Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, sung in Italian, lush, powerful and impressive, if not yet quite the Callas of legend. The whole disc is steeped in promise, a dramatic soprano daring to cross boundaries, always searching, always restless. But it's in the I Puritani that something electric happens. Here, Callas unleashes a new kind of singing, her voice leaping and swirling, every phrase lit with drama and risk. For the first time, you can hear the future, the Callas who would soon shake the very foundations of Critics called her I Puritani performance miraculous. For the first time, her name began to ripple beyond Athens and the provinces with real importance. There was talk of a new star, a soprano who could do the impossible and who might just change everything. If Venice was the birth, Milan was the coronation. La Scala, Italy's most daunting stage. Here legends were made and many were broken. Maria Callas' La Scala debut came in 1950 as Aida, a triumph but only a prelude. In December 1951, she returned as Norma. Still in her 20s, Callas stepped onto the stage with a presence larger than life, her voice newly focused, electrifying and unmistakable. She unleashed something the world had never heard, the grandeur of a tragic heroine, the agility of a bel canto expert, the intensity of a wounded soul. For the first time, these performances were captured in the studio. The early La Scala recordings, Norma I Vespri Siciliani, Macbeth, revealed what Milan already knew. A phenomenon had arrived. On these records, you feel the voltage in her voice, the way she could float a line in Casta Diva, so soft it seemed to glow, or unleash thunderbolts in a cabaletta, sending chills through the most jaded listener. The press crowned her La Divina. Her face was everywhere, newspapers, magazines, radio. Milan's high society fought for tickets. Singers, conductors, and composers came from around the world to hear her, then rushed to buy her records. But fame brought controversy. Her uncompromising standards, her refusal to flatter, her fierce insistence on artistic integrity. She demanded everything from herself and those around her. She never marked. She became a myth in her own lifetime, worshipped, scrutinized, envied, respected. In just a few short years, Maria Callas had traveled from obscurity in Athens to the summit of opera. Her voice and artistry, preserved on disc for generations, remade the repertoire and redefined what it meant to be a soprano. She awakened the lost art of bel canto. She leaves behind a legacy which we are still trying to come to terms with today. More of that later. By the early 1950s, Maria Callas had conquered Italy and her ambitions reached further. In 1950, she made her international debut in Mexico City, performing Aida and Il Trovatore. Famous recordings of high notes abound. Audiences were enthralled. In 1952, as we said, London's Covent Garden as Norma, and then her US debut in Chicago in 1954, cementing her global reputation. Amid this acclaim, Callas transformed physically. She lost nearly 80 pounds in little over a year, attributing it to a strict diet and discipline. She said it gave her freedom on stage, letting her embody tragic heroines more fully. The world was captivated by this new image, though debate swiftly swirled about its effect on her voice. Some, like Joan Sutherland, felt the rapid change weakened her strength. Others, like Tito Gobbi, insisted her artistry remained undiminished. Still, Callas pressed on, her commitment to both art and image reshaping the world of opera and inspiring generations to come. The 1960s should have been Callas's era of triumph. She was the most famous singer in the world, but behind the legend was turbulence. Her voice, once effortless, became fragile. Each performance was a battle. Cancellations mounted. The press, once her chorus, circled hungrily for drama. Personally, she found little peace. Her marriage to Meneghini's ended. Her affair with Onassis brought new pain. The men in her life admired her genius, but often failed to truly see her. Her mother's love came with jealousy and manipulation, leading to a bitter public break. And an awful, horrid, spiteful book written by her mother exposing secrets. Despite the fact that Callas always sent money home to her mother, she didn't want to speak to her. As the decade wore on, Callas's circle shrank. Surrounded by admirers and photographers, she was more alone than ever, her vulnerability exposed. Anxiety and insomnia crept in. Her health and confidence faltered. An increasing reliance on prescription medication damaged her health. The press made spectacle of her setbacks, and yet, even in darkness, her artistry could blaze forth, like that famous night in Rome, when she silenced rioters outside with a single defiant phrase. She had cancelled the performance before, which was attended by the king, because she was unwell. And as she sang Anna Bolena, instead of hurling at the singers on stage, "Who are you to defy me?" she turned to the audience, marched to the front of the stage, and hurled it into the crowd. By the end of the 60s, Callas had given everything. Her voice, her heart, her soul, longing for the family love and peace she had never found. No storm was more public or painful than a clash with Rudolf Bing at the Met. In 1958, after conflict over roles, Bing dismissed her by telegram. "I love her, I admire her, I respect her, and I have fire." Callas answered with defiance, giving a legendary performance of Medea in Dallas that same night. Later, she returned for 2 final performances of Tosca at the Met, closing a chapter marked by both glory and sorrow. Callas was at war with the world and herself, battling for her own destiny. In her story, we see the hunger for genius and the loneliness of those who dared to be extraordinary. She joins a sad list of women who have been hunted and destroyed by the press. As the 1970s dawned, Callas's voice, once unstoppable, was now battered by years of pressure and pain. Still, her will was indomitable. She recorded Puccini's Tosca for EMI, hoping to capture her artistry once more. The recording of her Carmen, made when her high notes were no longer to be trusted, showed signs of utter beauty and musicality. There were moments of greatness still, but also signs of decline. The world could hear her struggle. She retracted from the stage, teaching legendary mass classes at Juilliard. In 1973, she toured with Giuseppe Di Stefano, but the voice was now a shadow and her critics were merciless. By the mid-1970s, ill and isolated, she echoed the character in probably her greatest role, La Traviata, and withdrew to her Paris apartment, surrounded by memories. And then on September the 16th, 1977, Maria Callas died suddenly of a heart attack. Aged just 53, her voice may have faded, but her legend only grew. Many conspiracy theories abound about the true reason for her death. But let's just say that the official record is of a heart attack, and leave it at that. When we talk about Maria Callas' artistry, it's impossible to separate the legend from the woman. Her greatness wasn't just in her singing, but in her utterly unique and sometimes tortured way that she lived her art. Her voice wasn't lush like Tebaldi or Freni, nor did it have the endless float of a lyric soprano such as Caballe. Instead, it was focused, cutting, sometimes austere, but always alive with color and intensity. What made Callas truly singular was her ability to internalize music until it became part of her very being. Her vibratos didn't simply radiate outward, it seemed to shimmer inwards, pulling the listener with it, inviting us into her innermost feelings and emotions. There was an intimacy, as if you were eavesdropping on her soul, as if she was talking to you alone, some secret, in a cafe, hoping not to be listened to by others around her. Every phrase carried a lingering sense of longing. She imbued all of her singing with a downward portamento that gave even joyful lines a bittersweet ache, a touch of sadness that colored everything she sang. It was though every note came to us on a sigh, inviting us into her vulnerability and the truth she found in music. There have been endless discussions as to why the sound of her voice is so different and so special, and I can't answer that question here. I can only just add to the discussion. My teacher, Rudolf Pianai, told me once that he thought Callas was actually by nature a mezzo-soprano. Listen to that famous recording of Carmen with Georges Petro at the helm. She sounds so authentically mezzo. And there are other singers too, singers such as Rosa Poncel, in more modern times, Rosalind Playwright, who have also seemed to be by nature mezzo-sopranos with an elongated top. Reading contemporary reports of singers such as Pauline Viardot, people who sang at the time that these composers were writing these music, you also imagine that they also had similar voices. In fact, when these roles were written, mezzo-soprano didn't exist, and often roles such as Norma and Adalgisa were swapped between singers. Callas's relationship with the text was unparalleled. She famously hated speaking text on stage, but she began every new role by speaking the words aloud, finding the mouthfeel of the language before looking at the notes. For her, if you couldn't speak the truth, you couldn't sing it either. Every syllable landed with lived emotion. Her approach was obsessive, historically, psychologically, physically. She researched her roles endlessly. In her legendary Juilliard masterclasses, she demanded her students go beyond the notes and rhythms, insisting they find the living, breathing person with every role. She once said her greatest gift was to be able to start a note right on pitch. It sounds humble, it sounds odd, but this was the root of her freedom. The technical perfection this gave her total control. With it, she could direct the music entirely as she wished. Every phrase, every inflection, every emotional storm within her harnessed and released exactly as she intended. Total control when she was at her best. The emotional violence that simmered just beneath her own surface was always at her command, able to be unleashed for maximum dramatic effect on stage. Physically, Callas was a master of restraint. Despite coming from an era of hammy gestures, she eschewed grand gestures, pouring all the drama into her face, her wide, open, expressive face with those eyes and her mouth, sometimes confiding secrets to the audience with a single glance. Her artistry was never safe, but it was always honest, always compelling, and always her own. Maria Callas was not a perfect singer, but she was, in her limited repertoire, the most complete artist opera has ever known, at least in the modern recorded age. A vessel for music with passion and pain. She showed us that singing is not just about beautiful sounds, but about revealing the deepest truth of the music and of ourselves. And now, after more than 50 years since Callas last sang, her shadow still falls across the operatic world. With Serafine, she revived the lost art of bel canto. Before Callas, this music was neglected or abused. After Callas, it became the summit every soprano longs to scale. Her influence is inescapable. She's no Callas, critics sigh, or there's a touch of Callas in her, as each new soprano comes along. It's a burden and a testament. Her fame transcended opera. Even those who've never heard her sing know her name, the image, the aura. For me, her legacy is more than technical roles. Sometimes just the sound of her voice is enough to undo me. The opening of Casa Diva never fails to move me. Yes, I'm a baritone, so Dmitri Khodosovsky may always be my heart singer. But Callas remains, for me, the greatest exponent of the singing art that I have ever heard. Her expressivity, her risk-taking, her burning honesty, every note, every phrase was alive. She was, quite simply, divine. She was La Divina.